Good morning, everybody, and you're back this week with Burleigh County on the Extension Connection. And my name is Chandra Zeman-Belinsky. I'm the Family and Consumer Sciences Agent in the Burleigh County office. I'm joined here with Amelia.
Good morning, everybody. Amelia Dahl, 4-H Youth Development Agent in Burleigh County.
Well, today we're going to talk about a little bit about food preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And if
it's that time of year.
It is, and it's in full swing. And if you have any questions about canning, we encourage that you give us a call at 663-1270-1270. And also, Amelia is going to talk about how parents can help their kids manage stress, which is an outstanding. I'm learning, actually, tomorrow night I have a program with our family and community education gals, and it was originally, that council was originally known as Homemakers. Some of you may be aware of it. And we are actually talking a little bit about how stress can eventually affect you physiologically. But as I'm going through that presentation, I'm realizing that, everybody has a different level of stress. Doesn't matter what your age is.
Yep.
So I'm actually excited to hear about that.
There's actually the stress levels on a curve. So you don't perform very well when you're not stressed at all. Like when you're just kind of think about yourself laying on the beach, no stress, you're not doing a whole lot. With some stress, that's your peak performance. And then with too much stress, you kind of fall off the curve. But that curve is different for everybody. So what stresses me out and may be my point of optimal performance is not necessarily that same point for you.
Right. Okay. So we'll get to that in the latter part of the show. I'm going to start a little bit with food preservation, and I have been getting a lot of phone calls this season on canning tomatoes, which actually makes me happy. Anytime anybody calls me about food preservation, it makes me happy in general because they're wanting to make sure they do it safely. And, I just want to remind everybody that as we go through things, you're going to say, well, I have a recipe that I've used from my grandma or my mom, and I don't do that. I don't water bath can my pickles. But I will tell you the only suggested methods of food preservation to render it shelf stable. So in other words, I want to make pickles that I don't have to put in the fridge. I can, free up that space for other things in the fridge and freezer. I want to have it shelf stable. You have to either water bath can it or pressure can it, depending on if you add an acid. We'll talk a little bit about that. And
that's in your standard water bath canner and pressure canner, not any funky ways that you see on Pinterest.
Yeah. And that's very true. And Amelia, she runs, runs a site for co-op in town, and she gets all kinds of questions too.
Yep.
I mean, they're out there. So hopefully we answer a few of them today. So let's talk about canning tomatoes, okay? So specifically plain old tomatoes now, which I think is a brilliant idea because what don't you put tomatoes in?
I canned tomatoes last year, and I need to do it again this year because they're gone.
Really?
I did a whole case of them.
Yeah.
And tomatoes and tomato sauce, and we don't like the store-boughts anymore.
Do you do salsa?
I do tomato sauce, tomatoes, salsa, and spaghetti sauce.
Yeah. And, it can turn into an entire day on the weekend or something.
It's like it's like a month-long process because I have the biggest kitchen of all my friends. Okay. And so they like to come over to my house.
That makes sense because you like to cook a lot too.
Yep.
Yeah. So, so it's important that you are using one of the following two methods. Okay. You can water bath can your tomatoes. They can be whole tomatoes. They can be crushed, meaning they're, imperfect pieces, halved tomatoes. We have a fantastic publication. You can check out our website if you just Google Burleigh County Extension or just search on any of your browsers. You can, and search engines, you can find us. And then when you're out there on the left of our page, you will see a food, nutrition, and health link, and under that is food preservation. You can also search in our website for our publications, and this is publication F as in Foxtrot, N as in November, 175. This has all things tomatoes, whether you're going to can or freeze them. Okay, so if you choose to water bath can, what water bath canning means is that you are boiling the product long enough to be able to kill anything in there so it doesn't get you sick.
While it's in the can.
While it's in the can, exactly. So when you boil, what's the maximum temperature you can get up to? Do you happen to know? What temperature is boiling
212?
water? Yeah, 212 Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Celsius. So I always seem to ask quiz questions in here.
Usually I'm pretty good.
You are. I don't think you've ever got one wrong. So 212 degrees is the max you can get. Well, there's one particular food microorganism likes to live in our food, specifically when there's no air involved, so a sealed jar or can, and it can't be killed off with its spores until 240 degrees. Okay, so the only way we can manage that is to play with the pH of the product or add pressure. Okay, so if we play with the pH, we have to add a little bit of an acid, whether that's lemon juice, ascorbic acid, or what have you. We have to add that in order to adjust water bath can. And you can check out I encourage you to go to our publication on the website. If you wanted to add lemon juice to your tomatoes, and we're about to go on break here, let me just give you the amounts of acid. 2 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice or a half teaspoon of citric acid per quart. So if you're doing pints, you just take that by half.
Right.
So, because there's 2 pints in a quart. Okay, so 1 tablespoon bottled lemon juice to a 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid. You can find those at your local department store. All right, so after the break, we'll talk a little bit about pressure canning tomatoes. Thank you.
Right now, 61.
Get the traffic and weather information you need anytime on Super Talk 1270 and online at supertalk1270.com.
Welcome back to Extension Connection. This week you're with Burleigh County. My name is Chandra Zeman-Belinsky. I'm the Family and Consumer Sciences Agent talking about food preservation today, joined by Millie Dahl.
Good morning, almost afternoon.
Yeah, right. We're on the cusp. And she's going to talk a little bit later about how parents can help their kids manage stress. Okay, so let's get back. Right before the break, we talked a little bit about canning tomatoes. If you can tomatoes with a water bath canner, you have to add an acid. Now, we talked about 2 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice to a quart is one option. Also, a half teaspoon of citric acid, which is usually powder form, to a quart. Now, let me ask you, do you think you can use fresh lemon juice if you want to really be fresh? Do you think it's safe?
I would say no, because the acidity level of lemons would vary.
Okay, good answer. You know, and it probably does vary, certainly. The point is we don't know if you get enough acid with the same amount, you know. So bottled lemon juice is more standardized, so we do not suggest to use fresh lemon juice, okay? So use those for your lemonade. So when it comes to canning tomatoes, had a lot of questions about this here this season. Can you pressure can tomatoes? Yes, you can. Yes, you can, indeed. And actually, if you pressure can, you're able to get up to a temperature that's high enough to kill off that Clostridium botulinum microbial bug. And you don't have to add salt. You don't have to add that acid. You're getting up to a high enough temperature within a reasonable amount of time to be able to ward off that microorganism that can cause foodborne illness. And, you know, if it sounds like, well, this won't happen to me, you never know. Now, these stories are very realistic. They're not meant to scare you. But in April, Ohio had an outbreak of Clostridium botulinum. It happened to be, actually, this one was from, and I just talked to the folks up at the North Dakota Department of Health, the foodborne illness microbiologists, and they said, yeah, it actually caused 3 deaths, which I hadn't heard, and it was from canned potatoes with a P as in papa. And potatoes. And they weren't pressure canned, which potatoes are not acidic enough naturally. So in order to water bath can them, so either you have to add an acid or you have to pressure can them. These were not pressure canned, and this person went to a potluck at their church, and they made a fantastic homemade potato salad. But the problem is those potatoes weren't canned safely, and they got everybody else sick at that church function.
That is a prime example of why potlucks terrify me.
I know, and I don't want to scare anybody. But, you know, the important point is that when you're canning and you want to share it, okay, just be cognizant of, make sure you're doing the right thing. Give me a call at our office at 221-6865, or even if you have a question now, you can call me at 663-1270. Probably before 1:45, 1 o'clock here before the hour, and I'll be able to answer your questions. Now, a lot of you might think, well, aren't tomatoes acidic enough naturally? I get that all the time.
They used to be.
Okay, and yeah, they used to be. And even my mom, when she said, well, Chandra, my little guy, he's 11 months old, and he eats tomatoes. I just slice them up, grab one from the garden. We have Romas right now, and I will give them to him. I usually take the peeling off, but he will eat a whole tomato in a sitting. And my mom said, "Isn't that too acidic?" And I said, interestingly enough, we talk about this for canning a lot, and really anymore, they are not. I'm told that the acidity has been bred out of them. So by way of cross hybridization, how scientists are doing that, which is different than genetically modified organisms. This process happens naturally. Okay. So they're naturally saying, all right, the pH is hurting our digestive system. Well, guess what that's doing? That's affecting our canning of the tomatoes. So we actually have a nice publication. I talked earlier in the segment about finding our publications. If you go out and use a search engine, I always say Google, but use a search engine and find Burleigh County Extension. You can use the search engine on the top right-hand side. This particular publication is number FN, Foxtrot November 1396. Now, this is some research that was done right here in our state, Williston, North Dakota, which is why I love the publication, because it's local. It speaks to everybody here versus something that's done in another state. And there are, let's see here, I want to say almost 20 tomato varieties in different species. I mean, we have Vita Gold, we have Roma in here, Russian. And these are typically tomatoes that are used for canning and preservation. And the average pH, there's only 1, 2, 3 that are 4 that are under 5, and they're still in the 4.9 category. So the pH of tomatoes, do you know what the pH is to be safe, to be considered acidified, safe enough to warrant only water bath canning of 7? The product? Good question, or good guess. Okay, so if you think back to, science days, 7.0 is neutral for water. And the neutral level for canning foods, as it pertains to foodborne illness, is 4.6, okay? And so you have to be at least 4.6 or below in order to be considered safe and be able to just water bath can. And so some of our fruits are acidic enough naturally where you don't have to add an acid. Our tomatoes are no longer acidic enough. They are at about the 5.0, so way above, because remember the pH scale is exponential for each tenth, so thousands of times. In other words, hey, you know what? We've got to add some acid into our tomatoes, or we can pressure can, and I promised we'd talk about pressure canning now. So all of you canners out there, if you're worried about pressure canning because it scares you, I know, Amelia, you might be one of them, and you can a lot, right?
I do, but I don't pressure can.
Okay, so pressure canning, here's the big thing about pressure canners. There's 2 types, dial gauge and weighted gauge, okay? So the dial gauges you have to calibrate every year. The weighted gauge just has a weight that sets on top and it wiggles if you're, my particular pressure canner is 3 to 4 times a minute, it has the proper steam environment and pressure within it. And so, the thing about pressure canners is they have a safety release. They have a release, so they can't blow up on you anymore, okay? If there's too much pressure in there, it will release with its stopcock. So I just want to say that, first of all. But if you wanted to pressure can your tomatoes, it's really the most natural method. In other words, you don't have to add salt, you don't have to add acid. And in our area, we'll talk about altitude in just a second, but you're able to do pints or quarts of crushed tomatoes, okay? And if you wanted to do that if you wanted to take your processing time down for 15 minutes, you can do it at 15 pounds for a weighted gauge. If you have the dial gauge that you have to caliber, and it's a tick mark system, and a type of dial gauge, gauge looking with tick marks, you have to be at 12 pounds, again, for 15 minutes. Okay, so you can get all this information from our website.
That makes it quicker, too, because you have to water bath it for a lot longer than 12 minutes.
That's actually true. I didn't talk about how long you have to water bath. So for pints and quarts, you hot pack, so you have to cook the product before you put it in the jars, and you actually have to do that for 40 to 45 minutes. And so actually the pressure canning gets you up to that 240 degrees faster. You can do it quickly, and you don't have to add any salt. So those of us who are concerned about our sodium content. But let's talk about altitude. It's interesting. A lot of people think that we are as low as you can go. We're a flat state. Okay.
We are flat. Coming
We are
from
flat.
Montana, we are extremely flat.
Right, and I
You
lived
can-
in Wyoming for a while. We're flat.
You can stand on a pop can in Bismarck and watch your dog run all the way to Fargo. That's what I always said growing up.
That's good.
That's how flat North Dakota
That's
is.
good. And some people really like that. They feel confined with mountains around them. I know my father-in-law, he likes to be able to look out and see as far as he can see. So, that makes him feel free. And he's an outdoorsy guy. So I get both perspectives.
To each his own.
Yes. But I have to say, specifically now for Burleigh County residents, take a wild guess at where we're at for altitude.
I have to look it up every time I can.
Okay, yeah.
We're at like 15, right?
Okay, so because some parts of our county are between 2,000 to 3,000 feet, we say in general we're at 2,000 to 3,000 feet. So for canning purposes, you want to know where you're at. Now, I just happen to remember it was well before I joined Extension, but I was here in 2011 during a big flood that we had and affected a lot of residents in both counties, Morton and Burleigh, amongst pretty much the entire nation. But my point is that I remember the mayor at the time saying our mantra is we will sandbag to 1,800 feet. And so we know that some people are below 2,000 feet. We know that. So if you know your altitude, make sure you check with the local airport as well. They have the equipment to make sure that they're saying the proper altitude. But I'm going to say can at 2,000 feet, even if you think you might be under, because it's the safest choice, especially if you decide to share your food with your potlucks and your friends and family. So don't be afraid to if somebody gives you, and I think it's a heartfelt gift when somebody makes you a baked good or even preserves you food. Ask them what their process it was. Did you water bath can and how long, or did you pressure can this? Well, tell me how. So it's okay to inquire because we know more about microbiology now.
Yep.
So when we come back, we can talk a little bit about pressure multi-cookers, we call them, and then we'll get into Amelia's segment. So we'll take a break.
Right now, 61.
Get the app called Radio Pup for your iPhone and take us everywhere you go. Bismarck and Mandan's own Super Talk 1270.
Kevlar helmet, yeah. Hey, I saw the Kevlar save lives. Good morning, it's Chandra. Did you hear that, everybody? So it's Burleigh County with Extension Connection. We're talking all things food preservation. I really invite you to call the office if you have a question on whether or not your process is safe. 221-6865. I'm joined here by Amelia Dahl.
Good morning.
Yep, she's 4-H agent, and she's talking about managing stress a little bit later here. But, I just wanted to close out by saying, all right, we talked about tomatoes and preserving tomatoes. I've had a lot of questions on that this season. Now, salsa. Okay, salsa is interesting. The research that we've done, you want to make sure that you're using a research sound recipe. So meaning manage who your source is. USDA recipes are safe. NDSU Extension recipes are safe. We also are okay with the Ball book recipes. So if you're concerned, give me a buzz. We probably would need to look at some family recipes. We're not able to say yes or no on some of them, but we can look at what they look like in accordance with ours and in comparison. Excuse me. So, if you have a question on your home recipe, give me a buzz, 221-6865. All right, so salsa. Can you can salsa the same way as tomatoes? Well,
yes.
Yeah, really you can. Okay, the only thing that Amelia and I are finding, and, I asked her, she brought in some books for me to look at, too, if she found anything differently. Salsa, the only recipes out there that are recommended and tested for thermal processing are salsa recipes that are canned in pint jars. Okay, so even if you want to can in quart jars, it's not a safe process. And a lot of that has to do with, how the heat penetrates to the center of the food product within the jars. And, I called Oregon State. They have a nice food preservation hotline that they have open for the season. It closes with the end of October. And they said, really our reasoning is the majority of the time that you're using salsa for a sitting, you're not going to eat much more than a pint, as well as if it is called for in a recipe, you're probably going to use a pint more likely than a quart. And so they don't do their research on the larger sizes. And likely the if they were to, I would venture to say, because there's enough of a combination of foods in that product, there's onions, there's peppers, there's tomatoes in your salsa, that your times would go up. from your processing suggested times for pints. So do not use quart jars for salsa. Salsa is such a wonderful, it's actually the most commonly canned, home canned product, food product. So it's very popular. And I actually believe it's the most popular condiment in general in Americans' fridge, your average home fridge.
See that.
It's followed now by ketchup. Ketchup used to be number one. Okay, so I just want to end our food preservation segment by talking to you a little bit about those electric pressure multi-cookers, okay? And I know some of our retailers out there have them locally here in Bismarck and Mandan. And what we mean by multi-cookers is that they claim on the electrical appliance that you can cook in them as well as can in them. Now, they are a fantastic appliance. You can make a home meal that would normally take you an hour, sometimes in 15 minutes. I mean, you're done in 15 minutes by way of pressure, so it cooks faster. Now, can you safely can in them?
You cannot can in a cooker, but you can cook in a canner.
Okay, that's exactly right. Okay, so and that's really fun to say. Now, let's repeat that because that can be confusing. Look, you cannot can in these cookers. And it's important to say that relative to our altitude. So even in the manufacturer manuals, they'll even suggest to call your extension agent. But, when they give you the full process, we can't endorse them right now and say because there is not thermal processing research done with these products. And the big thing is that the temperature, again, just like those quart jars in that reference with salsa, the temperature within the jar, within the food contents, has not been tested. And you can do that, science, you have different temperature monitors, you download the information into the computer, and you can see what the internal temperature was. Nobody's done that yet that we know of. So that's the big thing. Do not use them. Also, the altitude, they are suggested at only 1,000 or under in general, in order to be able to safely can.
Which isn't a lot of places in North America. Just
It's not.
Point that out.
Hey, even in North Dakota. That's exactly right. I mean, so Fargo in our state is really the only big city that, just on that Red River Valley, just on the very eastern side of the state, is actually under 1,000 feet. So,
but it's barely under. Isn't
barely.
It like 950 or something?
It might be,
that?
actually. I should find out from when I'm there next. So let's move into, if you have any questions on food preservation, do not hesitate to call. If I don't call you back right away, I'll get back to you within a day or two. It is 221-6865. Now, I'm really excited to hear about how to manage stress, especially with youth.
Yeah, and we've all been back in school for a few weeks now, and tests are starting, homework is really starting to pick up. We're kind of getting into that season where we've passed the review of what we learned last year and we're starting into learning new content. And so we see kids getting stressed. They may get stressed from a variety of resources, whether it's home, school, friends, relationships. I mean, if you think back to even when you were in elementary school, your level of stress was different. My father-in-law always says, small people, small problems. But it's still a big stress for that person in that time.
Yeah.
There are some signs that you can watch for in your children if they are experiencing stress. There are 4 major categories. The first one being physical. So this could be maybe they're coming home with headaches, stomach aches. A kid who's been potty trained for a long time is all of a sudden wetting the bed. You may also see emotional signs such as fear, irritability, or sadness. Behavioral signs, crying, losing your temper, nervous tics. I see all sorts of kids when I go into school that bite their fingernails or pick at their fingers or their arms.
Yep.
That's what they mean by nervous tics.
Even like winking a little bit. Do you have on there bloodshot eyes? Consistently bloodshot eyes will also.
I think that would probably go back to the not sleeping.
Okay, all right.
Because usually that's what happens when you don't sleep. And then the next type of sign to kind of keep an eye on is relationships. So if they had a really good friend and they used to hang out with them on the weekends and now they want to have nothing to do with them, withdrawing from those friendships. If there's bullying happening, extreme shyness, this can be something that you notice with little kids. When they're in like that 4 or 5-year-old range, they're still learning what it means to be shy. And sometimes they act shy even though it's not their intention. But little kids can be stressed. I mean, it can be something as stressful as mom and dad are yelling in the house or mom's never home. Those kind of things contribute to kids' stress level. And while it may not, as adults, affect us or think, oh, they'll be fine, kids are resilient, but there is still some stress involved with everyday life. So some ways to help your children manage stress: help them talk about what's bothering them, help them label what the problem is. For if you go back to those behavior, losing their temper, throwing a fit, help them label that. Mom, I'm frustrated because.
Right. Be able to communicate it to you.
Yep.
Right? Okay.
Being able to say more than, I'm mad at you. Why are you mad at me? What are you frustrated with? How are you feeling? Because it may be that they say, Mom, I'm mad at you, when in reality, it's not you who's causing the stress. Their best friend at school is now dating their crush. And so there's that level of stress, and you're the person that's closest to them. Sure. Research shows that when kids get upset, and I'd worked with adults and children with disabilities before I came into this position. And research after research shows that behavior problems happen to people they care about most. So if you see youth acting out towards you as a parent, it's actually their way of showing you they love you.
Okay.
And as hard as that is
That's how it is in marriage. That's how it is, right?
Yeah. As hard as that is to kind of comprehend and be able to internalize.
Tough.
A parent is kind of that rock for that kid. And even if that kid doesn't tell you that, you really do need to be there. So help them understand. Instead of asking what's wrong, because you're going to get the typical nothing answer, be specific. How are things going at school?
Okay.
How is Maddie doing? What did you do out at recess? Make it a specific interview question. Bust out your journalism face or your private eye investigator, because really that's what you are as a parent.
Yeah.
You need to help that kid figure out what's going on.
Right. Cross-examination.
Yes. Another way to help them manage stress is spend one-on-one time through hobbies together. And that creates a bond, doing something together, and it also creates an atmosphere that allows open communication. If I'm sitting down to play Uno with my son, that's a more relaxed environment for him to come out and say, Haley was really mean to me today at daycare. Right. Which, if Haley's mom is listening, he didn't say that. But if I'm playing Uno, that's more likely to come out than if I'm sitting down staring at him across the couch and saying, William, tell me about your day. He's like, oh, I don't know. You have to pry that out of them.
Right.
And it's fun to do things. I love to play with Legos with my kids. That's one of William's favorite activities. So if I can sit down with him and play Legos with him, even for 15 minutes before he goes to bed, we both sleep better at night. We both got that time to spend together.
That's nice.
Show them how to relax and decompress. So if you as a parent are stressed, that rubs off on your kid. So maybe that means, for me, going outside and gardening. I take my boys out with me and we go out and garden together. Teaching them those coping skills when they're early will transfer into life.
Right.
And so when their stress level gets high when they're in their 20s, 30s, even in their older teens, they're able to say, oh, well, when mom was stressed, she went out and gardened. Maybe I need to go outside.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Reset.
So we are going to take a quick break, and then we will be back with some more tips about how you can help your kids manage stress.
Yeah, great.
Right now, 63.
Sean Hannity, weekdays at 2, only on Super Talk 1270.
All right, welcome back to the Extension Connection. This is Amelia Dahl from Burleigh County Extension, the 4-H Youth Development Agent over there. And before the break, we were talking about helping kids manage stress. We had talked a little earlier in the show about how we all have our own little kind of bell curve of stress. Right before, when you're super relaxed, think laying on the beach, not a lot of stress, you're not very productive. As you go up that curve, there is a peak point where you have a mild amount of stress, and you are very performance driven. And then if you get too stressed, your performance level goes down. And so we see that with kids, and we all have that different bell curve. Even as adults, my bell curve is different than Jim's bell curve or Chandra's bell curve. So watching for signs with your kids, and it can be things that you would never think would be a sign for stress, such as withdrawing from friends, being afraid of things that they didn't used to be afraid of. They're all signs to watch for. We also talked about being focused with your questions rather than saying what's wrong. asking how are things going at school or what did you do at daycare. One big important thing to remember with this is respect their answers. If you criticize what they're saying, this may cause them to stop sharing completely. So if I ask my son, hey, how was daycare today? Oh, Caden was mean to me and he took my toy. Well, William, you need to share. That's not promoting the, oh, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. And what can you do to work with that? That's well, you did something wrong. And that's not the image we want to give to our kids. That doesn't build up that self-esteem. So we talked about doing hobbies. Another great place to get together as a family is to eat meals. And research actually shows that families that sit down and eat at least 5 meals together a week reap great benefits. And this doesn't mean that 5 days a week you have to sit down at a big fancy dinner. It may be easier for your family to sit down and have lunch together. With my position, there are a lot of nights that I'm not home for dinner. And so I make a point to try and have breakfast with my kids in the morning. And that doesn't have to be extravagant. Most mornings we have a bowl of cereal. But it's showing that child that you have time for them and you're interested in what's going on in their life. Another way to kind of handle the stress of cooking meals is to either do crock pot meals, which are great. We do those at least once a week, throw stuff in the crock pot, and then it's ready for us when we get home at night. Or on the weekends when you're making meals, make a double batch and freeze half of it. If you're making enchiladas, make a double batch of enchiladas, throw half of it in the freezer, and then you have a meal that you can pull out quickly. Another way to help your children manage stress is to encourage them to role play with you. So help them learn how to handle problem situations. So maybe they disclose to you that they're having a rough time in middle school because their friend Susie is now dating their crush Tommy. And that's a really stressful thing for a teenager, especially when they're starting to get into those relationships, starting to understand what it means to be a true friend, what it means to have a boyfriend, girlfriend. Role play those situations, play that Susie person. How are they going to approach Susie? How can they still be friends and not be stressed out about that situation? And then model ways to handle stress for your children. And I think this is probably one of the most important things that we can do. Kids pay attention to what we do way more than what we say. I think they say about 75% of communication is nonverbal. So if we are saying, don't chew on your nails, and then we're sitting at the table chewing on our nails, the kids are going to pick up that, hey, well, mom's doing it, I can too. So we need to focus on how we as individuals can be less stressed so we can show our kids that being stressed is not important or is detrimental to our well-being. A little more about sitting down at the table. There's this great project. It's called the Family Dinner Project, and they are really encouraging families to sit down, eat together, spend time together, doing things at the dinner table. And if you have teenagers at home, you know that a lot of times when you say, how was school? Good. What'd you do? Nothing. I am as guilty of doing that as a teenager, and mom, dad, I'm sorry for that. But if they come to expect that at dinner, then maybe they'll come with more valuable contributions. I've seen cool things that you can do on Pinterest where you print off a bunch of questions, cut them up, put them in a cup, and then you pass the cup around the table and everybody draws one out. And it says things like, if you could take a vacation to anywhere in the world, money's not an option, where would you go? And who would you take with you? You'll get to know a lot about your kids and their personality, and it's not as direct as how are things going, because today they may say that I want to go to Jamaica with my friend Timmy, and then in 2 weeks they'll say, oh, well, I would go to Jamaica but with Susie. And then you have the opportunity to say, oh, well, who's Susie and what happened to Timmy? So it can really promote that discussion, create that bond with families. Older kids really like to have the interview, like they like to be the ones asking the questions, because if they're asking the questions, they're not the ones that are having to answer. They enjoy telling stories, particularly about their experiences or interests. After asking about your kid's day, a parent you may try to piggyback off of their response. For example, if a kid tells a story about not getting a part in the play, you may want to share a story about when you didn't get a part in the play or when you weren't elected as an officer, showing your parent or your child that, hey, it's happened to the best of us. We move on and we're okay. Your younger kids like to hear about you as parents. What were you like before kids? My parents always referred to this as the BC era, before children. So my parents would always say, well, back BC, before children, Mom and I used to go out dancing all the time. And so that was something that I learned about my parents. Do your kids know how you met? Do your kids know how Grandma and Grandpa met? What did you do for fun in the summertime? When I grew up, we would play in the irrigation ditch, even though we weren't supposed to. So we'd only do it when we had a babysitter who we convinced that was okay. And so sharing stories like that helps you connect with your kids on that level that, hey, Mom and Dad aren't all business. They're kind of fun. And maybe they're okay people. With younger kids, they really like guessing games. This is for those kids 2 to 7. We play a lot of I Spy with my 4-year-old when we're in the car, stuck in traffic. Play it at the dinner table. I spy something that grows in the ground and have them try and figure out what it is. Or I spy something that grows on a tree. Then you can tie in that education piece, but they're having fun, they're interacting, and they're not just worried about how they don't want to eat their vegetables. Another thing you can do is sit down with your teenager to get past the I'm fine is they like discussing public figures. So maybe you know that they really like the LA Lakers. And I'm going to show my true colors here, and I don't do sports at all. But ask them about their favorite Lakers player or how the Lakers did. And I know an NFL season just started, and so everybody's watching football. And what sports team are they following? Who are they cheering for? You get to know your child, and you also get them talking, and it kind of breaks up the, I don't want to talk to Mom and Dad. You can try exploring mystery foods. Take your kids to the grocery store and ask them to pick out a fruit or vegetable they've never had before and have never eaten at home. The lady who wrote this article said that years ago her kids picked out a coconut, and they spent the entire afternoon trying to figure out how to open a coconut. And I don't know if you've ever opened a coconut, but it is not a very easy thing to do.
Yeah, it took us about an hour to get it open.
Yeah, it's worth it in the end. Fresh coconut is wonderful.
Yeah, coconut milk.
Yes, but getting to that point is a little challenging. And you'll be surprised what your kids pick out. I don't know, have you ever had starfruit, Jim?
Starfruit?
Starfruit.
I don't even know what it is.
It's a yellow fruit it's shaped kind of like a star when you slice it.
I think I have, yeah.
It's amazing. So that's a cool thing for the kids to try. My son, who's 4, was convinced when we planted our garden this year that he didn't like carrots. He didn't like regular carrots, but he likes rainbow carrots. So they taste exactly the same, but don't tell William that.
Okay.
Yep. So we planted the rainbow carrots, and now he'll eat the rainbow carrots, even though they taste exactly like regular carrots, but he likes them in purple and white and red. Those are cooler to him. So have them pick it out so that they kind of get involved in that making process, and then involve them in the cooking. I'm a strong proponent of no matter how old your children are, you can involve them at some point in the kitchen. With my youngest son, who will be 2 in December, I measure things out and have him dump them into the mixer. It's an easy thing, but it's really a way to get them involved. So as we go into the new school year, remember, kids get stressed too. Help them as parents figure out what is stressing them and how they can cope with that. I encourage you to sit down with your family at least 5 meals a week, which if we eat 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 21 meals, 5 isn't that bad. Sit down 5 meals a week, really have those discussions with your family. That will help alleviate stress for your family. So kind of to wrap up our show here, if you have any questions about canning, please give Chandra a call at 221-6865. If you have questions about youth development, the new 4-H year just started. We would love to have more kids in 4-H. Call and ask for Amelia. We'll get you set up with a club. Have a great week, and we will talk to you guys in a few weeks.